Talk to me more about sort of like the brain interpreting things, and it's almost like a reality distortion feel.
No, it's not a reality distortion. It's a reality creator.
Reality creator. Okay, so what can we do? Understanding that, like I'm thinking, is there anything that we can do to get closer to truth or reality? Like understanding that our brain is sort of like stimulating and interpreting and sort of like making meaning. Is there anything we can do to get closer to what's actually happening, or closer to some sort of like objective truth, if you will? Like when that person cuts you off, or you're going to make meaning out of it, make sense of it. Is there anything that we can do to get closer to the reality of the world versus the reality of our head?
Well, the reality of your head was wired by the reality of the world, of some world that you grew up in. So oftentimes what happens is that the microwiring of your brain is shaped by one kind of world, and then you move to a different kind of world, and then it's really expensive to retool. Some brains do it well and others don't. And then mistakes are made and things become very expensive in various ways. So I think one thing that you can do is, I'm going to answer your question assuming that your question is valid, which is that we want to be closer to reality,
right?
Whatever that means, because sometimes I don't know that that's always really the right thing to do. But so here's an example. So somebody cuts me off and I'm really rushing to get someplace and someone cuts me off. But the initial meaning my brain is going to make is from my own personal perspective, because of course that's how we all see things. You can practice trying to see something from another person's point of view. So maybe that person just didn't see me. Maybe that person's rushing somewhere. Maybe that person has a kid who's in the hospital. Maybe that person has a really important meeting to be at, or something really important to take care of. There's this saying that comes from contemplative philosophy, which is that anger is a form of ignorance. And what that means is, when you only see something from your own perspective and you fail to acknowledge that there's another perspective, you are ignorant of something. And what you're ignorant of is the fact that, you exist in connection, like a complicated network of connections to other people.
You just can't see something, and therefore you're ignorant and angry.
Yeah, but you can try. You
right.
can practice. What it means to have control is not to then really try hard to take that person's perspective in that moment. What it means to have, because that's really hard, what it means to have control is that you practice taking other people's perspective before that moment, so that when that moment comes, you're you can do it very automatically. It's like, if you need to build a skill, you don't wait until the exact second that you need the skill and then try it. No, what you do is you practice the skill in advance until you get really practice at it, really automatic at it, and then you can kind of do it without a lot of effort. For example, taking somebody else's perspective is one way to get closer to reality, because it dislodges you from the illusion that your way of seeing things is the only way. And in fact, in science, there's a wonderful book by this historian of science her name is Naomi Oreskes. And the title of the book is called Why Trust Science? And her argument, which is a really intriguing argument, is that the way that we know that something is true in science, true with, scare quotes, is that a group of scientists who come from diverse backgrounds and have diverse beliefs and diverse values all come to consensus about what the evidence says. Then you can have much more confidence to call that finding a scientific fact. I mean, scientists don't like to use the word fact. And they don't like to use the word reality usually very much. But fact is a real no-no. It's an F word we just don't use in science because it's always conditional. It's always probabilistic. Really, there's a wonderful phrase by Henry Gee, who is a paleontologist who works for the journal Nature, and he wrote, "Science is the quantification of doubt. It's not about finding facts. It's about how likely is this observation to be true in these circumstances." And if you get a group of scientists who all have different backgrounds and different assumptions, and they come together in consensus, you can be much more sure that what you're observing is very likely to be the case in this circumstance, right? But if, however, you have no diversity in science and you have really, a bunch of people with the same background and the same history and the same assumptions, and they come together over consensus, what you're likely there to have is bias. Usually bias that upholds whatever advantage those people who are making the decision actually have. And so, but the same principle is useful in your own life, I think. And that is that you can choose to try to take somebody else's perspective. You can choose, like right now, you can look around the room, you can listen. If you pay attention to your body, there are some things that you can focus on that you weren't focusing on a moment ago, and you can change your experience. Like right now, what I'm about to say, there's something that you and I are both doing right now that our brains were not tracking. Well, our brains were tracking, but we weren't really aware. It wasn't in the forefront of awareness. But the minute I say it, it will be in the forefront of your awareness. And that is your legs pressing against the seat of your chair, or your back pressing against the back of your chair. That sense state is always there, but you mostly don't pay attention to it unless you're in discomfort in some way.
Your focus determines where your attention goes. Yeah.
So here's an example of something that's similar that I do almost every day. Not because I'm just trying to build a skill, like build a muscle, Every day, as I'm walking on the sidewalk, say, I look for a weed. I look for a moment where I can feel awe over the power of nature that is just will not be, repressed, will not be contained by humans' need to try to control it. And for me, the perfect example is a weed. When I see a weed popping up through the crack of a sidewalk, I almost always now practice trying to see that as a really wondrous, beautiful thing, because it's a symbol of the fact that nature is irrepressible, and there are many things in life which are much bigger than you. And when you cultivate those moments where you realize that the natural world is much bigger than you, well, at least for me anyways, I don't experience that as an existential crisis. I experience that as an existential break. Like, okay, something's bigger than me. Many things are bigger than me. That means my problems in the moment are really small and conditional. And that gives my nervous system a break for a minute. I really try to cultivate every day at least one moment where I feel like a speck